I'm Paul Rogers, Curator of Public Programs and Education at the Museum of Art and Design, Miami-Dade College, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Kislak Talks program in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. Carlos Betancourt, The Body Remembers, a letter to Bartolome de las Casas, a conversation between Carlos Betancourt and Dr. Carol Damian. The Kislak Center is part of Miami-Dade College's special collections housed in the historic Freedom Tower. The Kislak Center collection is comprised of remarkable objects and artifacts that enlighten the history of the Americas, objects all of you should come and see. To learn more about the Kislak Center, go to moadmdc.org and follow the link to the special collections. And I should add, right now, the collection is in temporary storage while the Freedom Tower is being refurbished, but there's plenty for you to explore about the Kislak Center online. Carlos Betancourt is an award-winning artist residing in Miami, Florida. His work can be found in numerous museum collections, including the National Portrait Gallery, Washington, D.C., the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, the Perez Art Museum here in Miami, and the Museo de Arte de Ponce, Puerto Rico, among others. Dr. Carol Damian, curator of the Kislak collection, is an art historian and former professor of art history in the School of Art and Art History at Florida International University and former director and chief curator of the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum at FIU. Please note, Mr. Betancourt and Dr. Damian will field questions from the audience, which you can submit by clicking the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. Thank you and enjoy the talk. Dr. Damian.
Thank you for joining us. The Kislak collection has such extraordinary documents, maps, and objects. And I was really thrilled to find out that Carlos Betancourt was inspired by one of them, by Bartolome de las Casas, Entre los Remedios, the third tract. And that means that he wrote 9 tracts, they're like little pamphlets, and beginning in 1516, and they were published in Sevilla in 1552. So we are really honored to have a first edition in our collection and to have an artist who really appreciates this particular document. So Carlos is, as Paul said, an artist, a Miami artist born in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And he is going to talk to us about how this extraordinary manuscript book inspired him. Let me give you a brief introduction to Bartolome de las Casas. He was a landowner, a friar, and a priest, and he is considered the defender of the Indians because it was in his publications that he described the atrocities committed by the colonizers against the indigenous peoples. So my question to Carlos has been, why did Bartolome de las Casas inspire you, especially in this very notable book that he writes this letter to the king? And you have taken this letter and done something quite extraordinary. You have written your letter to Bartolome de las Casas. So can you talk to us a little bit about how and why it inspires you?
Sure. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Carol, for this introduction and for inviting me to these talks. And Carol, thank you for this journey with you for so many decades. You have helped me to find my voice, and I say that from the bottom of my heart, and help me understand my artwork as well, especially when I work so strongly with the visual image, and I trust it. But you have helped me to put words into it, which is a very difficult task for many artists. So why de las Casas? I think through my upbringing in Puerto Rico, somehow everything led to Las Casas when I was asking cultural questions. I grew up listening to what I thought was myth about the cacique chieftains of Puerto Rico, of Cuba, the Caribbean, like Siboney, Anacaona, Loíza. And I thought the stories I heard of them were just pure mythology. And as I grew up older, I found out that actually there was an account, a personal account on someone that was physically there in front of these caciques and documented their existence, literally documented their words. So I say that all roads led to Bartolome as I was growing up. When I was old enough to have a document or the book of my hand of the destruction of the Indies, and I read plenty about it, I was really taken by the presence of this man that went there with a point of view that quickly changed as he saw the atrocities committed against the indigenous people of the Americas. If you know a little bit about my work, I always believe that art should be informed by one's own experiences, what's right in front of you. And Bartolome's document, literally, that's what it is. He archived and documented what was right in front of him. And that's what I try to do with my work. With Bartolome also helped me to embrace my own culture, embrace my own reality, what's in the past, where I come from. I think, Carol, you and I have talked vastly about this, is the only way that you could be honest with your artwork. So finding this manuscript years in the Kislak Foundation, it triggered that search that led me to define and to understand my artwork and my uniqueness, literally to find my voice. It's very important. I want to say that moment that I reached to the Kislak Foundation decades ago. It was located, I think it was in Miami Lakes, thanks to Arthur Dunkelman, that took me there to see this manuscript that you just mentioned. I was volunteering with the Miami Circle, and it is one of those moments, I don't know for some of you that may be familiar with it or not, it's an archaeological site in downtown Miami. I literally jumped a fence to volunteer in this place. I did something illegal. Bob Carr, the main archaeologist for the city of Miami, came like running towards me. He's like, "You can do that. You can jump that fence. That's illegal." And I introduced myself. I said all I wanted to do was be part of this exploration in downtown Miami. I wanted to get my hands immersed. I wanted to touch the past of Miami, something that I think is very difficult to do. And they allowed me to immediately, within half an hour, I was sifting through the oolite and finding Spanish artifacts and eventually Tequesta artifacts. I say this because this is the same time when I have to run literally to the Kislak Foundation and touch something else, which is this manuscript. When I was living in Miami for a very long time, coming from such a strong culture in Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean, is so defined by our cultural heritage, be it European and at the same time indigenous. The Taino culture is so rich in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean. I found myself very lost in Miami, not understanding really what was Miami about or what was its history. All that prevailed was pop culture. And it was at that moment that I wanted to make a connection between where I was coming from, the Caribbean basin, and Miami. So once I immersed myself in that Miami Circle with Bob Carr, got my hands dirty, started touching literally with my hands. And I said that in a very physical and romantic way, these objects, I was able to go to the Kislak Foundation, which I had no clue it existed, in Miami, with some of the most treasured objects for me, right up in my backyard. And I had a feast. Immediately, I started finding the connection with the European settlers and conquistadors of Florida. I made a connection with Puerto Rico. Thanks to this manuscript, I started understanding that there was a connection with Florida as well, with Ponce de Leon, for better or worse. And Puerto Rico, Ponce de Leon was the first governor of Puerto Rico. Ponce de Leon died in Florida. And it was important to me to touch this document. It's important for me to see the actual physical objects. And the Kislak collection was instrumental for me in this part of the world. Puerto Rico has a great museums, and I was able to really see firsthand a lot of Taino artifacts. The Tainos being the indigenous people that welcomed Christopher Columbus in the Caribbean, for those of you that are not familiar. I think I may have touched too long in this question, but it is an important question, and that's how I came along Bartolome, no?
So let's go on to this work, which you call the letter to Aracoel. Who is she? And why did you write a letter to her? And how does it relate to Bartolome de Las Casas?
Well, I mentioned earlier that Bartolome wrote a lot about Taino culture. He mentioned Anacaona, which was a cacique chief. I eventually found out about other women that were very strong and leaders in Taino culture. I think he also mentioned Loisa. So I find out that Taino culture is a matriarchal society, and I grew up surrounded by very strong women. Actually, we call them macheteras, like, you know, Latin women are very strong leaders. And so this is how I grew up surrounded by, in a way, and I tend to romanticize a lot this, by a matriarchal society around me in Puerto Rico. My father was also a very strong figure. And if some of you may know my mother, you know how strong that lady is. So I used her here. I used my grandmother in my hand. That's a picture of her. That is Aracoel. Aracoel in Taino means grandmother. For use of another word, I thought it was very poetic to find out, like many other cultures, that the Taino people had a word for grandmother. And through that, through